One of the things that we do is in certain customers that are of a significant size, we have weekly internal account team discussions. What are the projects that we're delivering? What are the delays? I sit in as the executive in case I need to go escalate anything internally to our leadership team. And it's that kind of like coordinated focus that sometimes you have it with like quarterly internal QBRs. On some of our accounts, we have that weekly. So I think further breaking down those silos of like the CSM can't do it alone, the account manager can't do it alone, support, they're blindsided because they're not brought in. So that's one thing that we're doing differently is spending the time internally first, understanding the different roles that fortunately or unfortunately do have to touch the customer and do impact how successful they are with our products.
Hi, I'm Jan.
And I'm Andrea.
And we're here for a second episode of The Value Shift, where we interview CS and GTM leaders on the front lines of reshaping how we deliver customer value in this ever-changing market.
I'm so excited to introduce our guest, Ejieme Eromosele. Ejieme is currently VP of Customer Growth at Quiq, co-author of the best-selling book, The Customer Success Talent Playbook, founder of Success in Black, and a top 25 CS influencer for 2 years in a row now, and somebody that I've known personally for 5 years and find that every conversation we have, she brings clarity and depth and perspective. I'm really, really grateful to have you here. Welcome, Ejieme.
Thank you so much, Andrea, and great to meet you, Jan, and excited for this conversation.
As we were defining the thesis of this podcast, Jan and I were looking at one of your quotes. It kind of almost even helped us gain a clarity on what we wanted to do, and that became our anchor. And that quote was, "Our world is quickly and constantly changing. The things that used to work don't seem to anymore, and the best practices feel outdated before you can even codify them." Can you tell me a bit more about that and that feeling? I'm hearing that from a lot of people right now.
Yeah, I wrote that post the week that it was a really hard week. We had a very large customer that had been a customer for many years tell us that they were moving in a different direction. So it was a renewal conversation, and we were a bit blindsided. We thought we knew the outcome that they were going to renew. And it was quite a shock and for very specific reasons, which we'll get into, I think, in this conversation, in terms of the competitive pressures for SaaS teams, for customer success and sales teams. Yeah, it was a surprise, right? So I was really feeling emotionally vulnerable, I think, on LinkedIn, and I shared it that day. Just because, again, you think that you know the process and doing all the right things, and then that happens, right? We also sell AI, just given the pace at which change and technology, AI is happening. I wanted to, I guess, communicate to others that like things are changing quickly, and the things, again, that we think used to work, we have to rethink them and reevaluate them. Yeah, and I think, you know, as we look at being SaaS and being go-to-market leaders, every like, what is it, 18 months, an executive, changes role, I think is the average, like 18 to 24 months, right? So, I think now even that's probably shorter. So it's what are the things that, or I would say principles that we can start to apply as opposed to playbooks. Yeah, so thought to share that with the LinkedIn community and see if anyone resonates with that.
And I bet a lot of people, I'm hearing a lot of the same things. And I think the reason we anchored on it as well is because we were talking about what we wanted this podcast to be. And
Mhm.
both Jan and I, from talking to customer success leaders, being in that world, are seeing the same things. I remember 3 or 5 years ago in customer success, it was all about refining the playbooks. We kind of knew what worked. We kind of knew what we
Uh,
needed to do. And all our discussions were about how do we do this better? And now I think all of the discussions are around what are we doing? And what
Right.
what does this even need to look like? Which is I think some of what we want to cover today. And what I'm really excited to talk about is what does this look like and what do our teams look like?
Mhm.
But before we do that, maybe tell us a little bit more about Quiq, where you're leading
Yeah.
customer growth and what it looks like to lead customer growth there.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can talk about the title too, because a lot of people are confused by it still. My
Yeah,
LinkedIn DMs are full of people that think I'm a marketer. but I'm not. So we can get into that. So yeah, Quiq is an AI-powered conversational engagement platform that pretty much helps connect companies with their customers using digital messaging and now using AI. Well, I say now. We were selling AI since 2018. And so, the idea is that historically companies stand up customer support channels and it's primarily reactive and they're usually on phone and email. Those are higher cost channels because they're synchronous. One call center agent can only talk to one customer at one time. We shifted those conversations to digital messaging. So web chat, SMS, Apple and Google both have platforms now where businesses can connect with their customers. But of course, even social media, Instagram DMs. Of course, we layered in AI where, sometimes AI can help answer the question entirely if, let's say, it's a simple FAQ, or maybe even gather bits of information so that it can hand off to a human so that human can get started faster. And so you as a customer don't have to repeat yourself. So that's our business. We really focus on enterprise companies. So usually companies that are at least let's say 500 million and up, but we also still have some smaller customers in that pool, about a little over 200 customers now that, again, big enterprise companies, but also smaller ones as well. And so my role as VP of customer growth is really, I'm responsible for NRR. That's my metric. So it's retention and expansion across our book of business. I've got account managers on my team that help deliver that. The growth title, I think, is confusing for people. And so that's why they think I'm a
Yeah.
marketer. I'm actually really passionate and interested to elevate the right side of the bow tie. It is a growth function and a growth engine.
Mm.
Why don't we just call it that? So I kind of played around when I was returning from being GM of EMEA in London and, coming back to the States. I really wanted to put on the customer growth tag. I pitched it to my CEO. He's like, yeah, sure, that sounds great. And so, yeah, that's what I've moved forward with.
And a follow-up question, is that something that is a natural extension of the way the role was evolving, or do you think that's reflective of a broader change in customer success? Customer success as a sales function is maybe less divisive than it was a few years ago, but still
Yeah.
not, something that people are necessarily at ease with.
So what's interesting is I actually don't have our CSM team on my team. So I used to have CS and account management. When I came back from spending time in London, we really wanted to focus on retention and expansion. So, we both said, let's just have me focus on that. We had also hired a new chief experience officer that was really looking at the interplay of product, professional services, support, and CS. So let him go do his thing. I'll focus on the revenue piece. But I do think the name itself is a better articulation of what, in my mind, a few functions together can deliver in SaaS. And that is, you bring on a customer, new business sells them, but the way that SaaS is sustainable is you need to renew and you need to expand that customer. And so that is not only a function of customer success, depending on the product, depending on your market, you might actually need sellers too to come in. Like that's how we've divided our team, is that we have account managers and we have CSMs. CSMs are not commercially responsible for the renewal or expansion, knowing that they play a significant role though, because we have a highly complex product and we sell to enterprise. So it's not an easy renewal or expansion discussion. So I do think it's a clear articulation of the value of a few different teams in a traditional post-sales motion. So, I mean, I'm bullish. I know it's end of year, so everyone's doing prediction. I want to predict that customer growth is actually going to be hopefully the word that we use to describe a few different teams that can come together and deliver value to our customers, but also value back to the businesses as well.
I like that. I think that that's a really clear articulation and the best definition I've heard yet for growth.
Yeah.
Let's normalize that now.
Yes. Yeah.
Thinking about your team and the shifts that your team has had and the shifts that you're looking forward to, you said, everyone's thinking about next year and
Yeah.
planning for that. You're also starting to rethink the roles in general that are needed, both in your teams and also in the customers you serve. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of those shifts or how you're starting to think about those changes?
Yeah. So one of the things that I think we are trying to do a better job of is creating joint goals as a team. NRR is always a very important metric, but how do we make sure that we have the right account teams, if you will, to help deliver that. So, as I mentioned, we have customer success managers, we have account managers, but again, we sell a complex product to very large businesses. We also need to bring in several experts in our professional services team that are more dedicated to those accounts to deliver expert guidance and to help make sure that we can, guide our customers down a path of success. So I do think that a big shift is, how do we further break down the silos to create process teams. One of the things that we do is in certain customers that are of a significant size, we have weekly internal account team discussions. What are the projects that we're delivering? What are the delays? I sit in as the executive in case I need to go escalate anything internally to our leadership team. And it's that kind of coordinated focus that sometimes you have it with like quarterly internal QBRs. On some of our accounts, we have that weekly, right? So I think further breaking down those silos of like the CSM can't do it alone, the account manager can't do it alone, support, they're blindsided because they're not brought in. So that's one thing that we're doing differently is spending the time internally first, understanding the different roles that fortunately or unfortunately do have to touch the customer and do impact how successful they are with our product. So that's one thing that's changing for us. I think the other thing I'm really excited about, we just hired our first head of RevOps. I think the ops function is going to be critical going forward. It's already been kind of like a sexy role, right, in the past years. But I think even more now as we think about AI, and look, I sell AI, so I know what it requires. It requires good data. It requires good context. So even just articulating what the process is or what the business logic is so that it can do the thing well. And so internally as SaaS teams, I think the ops function, whether it's RevOps or I'm hearing now GTM ops, CS ops, I think the ops role is going to be critical one. And it's not only just the data, it's in the process, it's in the documentation as well. So I think that's another one. And again, we just hired ours over the summer and he's still cleaning up Salesforce to start. But what I'm excited to partner with him on is, okay, like what's next in terms of our internal routines so that we can get tighter as a team, we can break down the silos, we can share data and knowledge faster, and all of that. So I think that's the second shift that is already underway. And I think to go back to CSMs, again, I don't have my CSMs reporting to me currently, but obviously I still love the role. I think it's still so critical and so important. That role is changing and has changed. We've been talking about this, I think, for, probably the last 18 months. We're seeing that you're either going to become slightly more technical or slightly more commercial. I also think there's another sliver of, depending on, again, the industry and the product, just how much of an expert are you in that? So the example I'll give you, our customers are typically contact center, customer service, customer experience leaders. That world has its own language, it has its own metrics, it has its own complexity. And so are you a CSM that actually has been a contact center manager? So that depth of industry expertise, I think is the other dimension of where CSM can add value. So I would say that those are the big shifts that I'm seeing and that I'm excited about too.
And how does that directly impact the way the team is structured? You mentioned this like task force bootcamp type approach for certain customers, but today in your team, how does that work in? I think it's always interesting to have practical example from an organization because then it
Yeah.
gets to hit the real stuff
Yeah.
and try to be implemented. How does that work in terms of division of tasks?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I'm okay with somewhat blurred lines because I think
Yeah. Okay.
it reinforces that like joint accountability. So, I'll give you a good example. We have a very large customer in New York. We have a great CSM and a great account manager. They're talking about that customer again on a weekly basis. We
Yeah.
have several projects going on with them at the same time. They're considering expanding onto new parts of our product. So for me, the commercial aspect is not something that should be only reserved for obviously when it's time for renewal or when it's time for expansion. To me, the commercial aspect is also, are we delivering the value that we said we would, right? That, again, traditionally has been a CSM responsibility. I think it still can continue to be. But one of the things I'm seeing, and I think a lot of go-to-market leaders are seeing, is that the renewal conversation is getting a lot more value and ROI based, right? So if you as an account manager aren't in tune and in lockstep with, okay, what is the value we're delivering? Where are we stuck on delivering even more value for certain use cases? And working with the CSM on kind of like identifying that proactively, speaking to the customer. In a lot of what we do, like we can't always measure the ROI ourselves. We need data from the customer as well, right? So it's like, okay, how are we already getting ahead of these conversations before it's time for renewal and refining them as we go to prepare for that big renewal, right? So, that's how our AMs and our CSMs pair, because any new use case that we talk about before we go have our professional services team issue a change order or anything like that, the account managers are like, okay, well, how much value are we delivering here? What are we actually charging for this? Should we actually be charging them for this?
Yeah.
Based on the history of the account. So that's sort of how they pair, especially on our strategic accounts. On some of our smaller accounts, actually, we don't have a CSM. So CSMs are only dedicated to a certain portion. We have a managed services agreement with a lot of our customers, meaning that they're actually paying for an expert pool of people, including a CSM, including some of our solutions engineers and some of our
Mhm.
implementation managers. They're actually paying for those resources. For our smaller segment that don't have CSMs, both the commercial conversation and the value conversation are had by the account managers. Just when you have greater complexity, at least in the types of customers that we have in our product, you need a team, you need a village almost to
Yeah.
get that over the line.
Are you seeing any shifts in how you're thinking about departmental structure or the types of roles that you have?
Yeah.
We talked kind of about creating more alignment, breaking down some of the silos to have task teams.
Yep.
How are the actual roles shifting?
Yeah, so this summer I hired my first scaled account manager. There was an opening on my team for an account manager, and I pulled up the old JD and I was reading it, and I was like, yeah, like this is fine. Like this is okay. I really wanted to challenge ourselves to have more of a, you can call it a digital touch, you can call it whatever. I called it scale, right? So how do we, with this one resource now, how does he or she handle a large segment of accounts that are smaller accounts, but still need to retain them, still need to see how they can grow with us. And so I chucked the old JD and yeah, rewrote it in that lens, and with the understanding that a large part of what this person now needs to help us do is deliver automation and AI to this space. That is what scale looks like. You can't scale with humans, you scale with automation and AI. So hired someone into that role to help us figure that out. And like my vision for that role, so she's an account manager for our small segment, but the vision for the role is that some of the things that she puts in place can totally be applicable to our larger segment of customers. We've segmented our touch strategy and our engagement strategy, but it doesn't mean, our largest customer can't have our newly, realized kind of like newsletter that she's developing for us, right? Like they're still going to see value from that. Then they're going to have different touch points in the small segment, but some of the things that she's helping us build can apply to the rest of our customer base as well. And so to go back to that GTM ops, at the same time, we're hiring our head of Rev Ops. And I was like, that's great. Let's still go hire that person. But on my team and for what I'm seeing that our customers need, I also want someone dedicated that's kind of in the role as well, because they'll also understand what is it that we actually need and hopefully can partner with our head of Rev Ops to kind of get that for our whole book. So that's the new role that on our team that we just hired for, and she's doing great. The other role that I'm actually back and forth on is someone to help us with analytics and insights. So much of what we do and so much of what our platform delivers value to our customers is in the fact that we're sort of like a B to C, right? So you go to one of our customers' website and the little widget you see, that's our technology.
Yeah.
So every conversation, everything that their customers are saying to that business, we have access to. And historically, it's been very challenging to mine that data, understand what's happening, a little bit manual, right? Because, it's a lot of data. And so now that we have large language models, that is hopefully an easier task.
Yeah.
The issue, though, is that you still have to know what you're looking for and know what to ask, or you're boiling the ocean. It's actually an overwhelming amount of data. So I'm toying with the idea of having someone help us figure out what are those sorts of, whether you call them insights packages that we can help now deliver to our CSMs to say, if you have this type of customer with these use cases, this industry, here's a framework of how to think about what value means for them, and here's how to analyze that. So
Yeah.
I had a JD up. I kind of put it down again because I'm trying to see if we can even further productize some of that stuff. Do we need a human to help us do it? Maybe. So that's something that I'm still kind of like toying with. But I think, again, going back to data, AI analytics, like now with the power of LLMs, there's so much that we can do. I still think that a lot of us are still trying to figure out, like, well, what does that look like? And I think some of us, yeah, we actually need a role to help us think about what
Yeah.
we're doing. Because I think right now, and I'm doing this to my team, right? Leaders are telling their teams, use AI to be more efficient, right?
Yeah.
I actually need time to think about how I can use AI to be more efficient. But if you're a CSM and you're swamped and like, you're already in the weeds, you're already doing all the manual work, like you actually don't have time to think about that, right? And I as a leader too, I'm trying to like put it in my time and trying to
Yeah.
force myself to learn this stuff too. But what if we just like hired a role to help us think about it? But then the question is, and this is why I'm going back and forth with my boss on, is like, well, is that a full-time, like, what is that person going to do after they help us figure it out? And so that's why we haven't actually made the hire yet, but the need is still there. So I'm actually curious how other people are thinking about it, because I do think that instead of just like throwing it at folks to say, go figure it out, you need an aligned strategy, and maybe you need actually someone who has the time and the mental capacity to go help you figure it out.
Maybe a follow-up question on that. Is that something now when you look at hiring, you pay attention to people's experience with AI, like as a
Absolutely.
differentiator?
Absolutely. How are you using AI? Like, I mean, even when we were looking at resumes, I actually was a little shocked. I mean, I actually had this number because I was talking to my boss about it. Say 70% of the resumes that we were looking at like didn't mention using AI, which I mean, we just took a run at looking at resumes and interviews a few weeks ago. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that anyone that's looking for a job right now, if you're not, and it's hard, right? Because it's like maybe you're looking for a job, you actually haven't had the opportunity to use it in the function. But I think there's a question of like, well, how are you using it in your job search? How would you hypothetically use it, right?
Yeah.
So that is something that, yes, any hire at this point we're hiring, we're asking that question.
Yeah, the importance of AI becomes one of those the must-have skills.
That's
And
right.
it is interesting though, right? We all have been taught how to write resumes, and we're taught put those retention numbers in there if you've been in CS, put those sales targets in there if you've been in sales.
Yep.
But I don't know that we know how to talk about how we've used AI, right? How do you
Yeah.
what does that line even what I guess maybe what do you when you've seen interesting resumes that have stood out for
Mhm.
you, because there's lots of job hunters out there right now who will probably be listening to this.
Yeah.
What stands out for you, or what ways have you seen people mention it that you're like, "Oh, yeah."
Green. I had an interview. We ended up not moving forward, but there was a gal who, she said, for I think it was a month, she just documented all of the inbound requests. So like CS, we joke like we're not
Mm.
customer support. At the end of the day, like your customers are gonna go to you and you're gonna play a bit of a support function, right?
Yeah.
So she just documented all of the requests by channel also. So she's like, was it a in real time conversation? Was it over email? And kind of just consolidated all of those requests, and then went to ChatGPT and pulled down some of the FAQs that they have on their website and said, what portion of, so it was more kind of like aggregating the requests she was getting
Yeah.
and seeing what portion of these, like, could I have just directed a customer to a website that was publicly available on our help in docs that could have answered this, and kind of like developed her own chatbot a bit, which
Yeah.
was the end state of it. She didn't release it to any customers. She's like, that's something that she's actually like working with her support team because they didn't have a customer service bot. But that's something she did on her own, which is like really, really interesting. Like, again, she hadn't deployed it yet, like, but kind of thinking through again, like, so much of my time is spent answering customer support questions. Like, do we have enough of this already available so that maybe in a few months we could actually have a customer facing bot? Like, because her question too, which I thought was really insightful, is like, you know, are these things that a bot should even be responding to, right? And so I think just even doing the analysis can help you determine like, okay, which questions do we want maybe to go to a chatbot, or which questions,
Yeah.
which is very interesting because the technology we sell is exactly that for our customer. So yeah, quite an interesting use of, drink your own champagne a bit of,
Mm.
how do you automate yourself or automate some parts of the work that you do? I thought that was an example that stood out.
Yeah. And maybe like extension, because that's a discussion we had on the previous one. It's probably a theme we're gonna have every time, is like any practical usage you've implemented over like 6, 8 months in your team that has proven to be really helpful, kind of hard to, hate to call that game changer, but like things that were working and that, people that are, it's a step change in the way you do the work.
Game changers, tough.
Life changing ideas
Not game
only.
changer. I mean, see what I
Incremental.
mean?
I'm
In the
I'm
function.
I'm toying with I've not shared it with my team yet. I'm still just like vibe coding, whatever you want to
Mm.
call it, like a few GPTs, but to give folks a better, it's about codifying the decision making that goes on with our complex renewal discussions. And so, you know, I spend a lot of time like coaching the team on how to have these renewal conversations. And so what I'm doing right now is putting some principles down on paper. So one of the principles is the end goal is to save the account, even if that means they're not paying for X amount of time, especially if it's of a certain level and strategic importance for us. We'll give them away. We'll give away the product for, 3 months, 6 months, whatever it is. So that's one principle, is like, don't churn the account. Like, let's figure out what to do to even keep them on. Another one is, we have a lot of things that we can play with in terms of throwing additional services. So there's a little list of gives that we can give when
Yeah.
it comes to a renewal negotiation, is another one. We don't have any of this documented. It all lives in my head. It lives in my boss's head. And so the first thing I'm doing is documenting this stuff because I want to eventually have it be maybe a GPT. Like, I don't even know what I
Mm.
want it to do yet, right? But I go back to the data level, and this is where GTM ops is important. A lot of the process, a lot of the things that we do are just really in our heads. You can't automate it and you can't use AI on it unless it's codified in some way. So I think that for me is a game changer, is, even in my conversations now, some of my one-on-ones, I don't want to record our one-on-ones, but I'm like, that should be documented. What I just said, what we
Yeah.
just talked about should be documented. And so I think the first step for me and us, and, we're still somewhat early stage as a business, is documenting some of these things that kind of live in people's heads, principles. I don't want to call them best practices because, like, those are evolving, but just things that we do to help someone make a decision, putting it down on paper.
It's super interesting. Yeah, we talk a lot about how we need data and data infrastructures, and the data is so much more important. But I think we talk
Yeah.
less about all those other nebulous things that are in our heads as leaders.
Yeah,
That
context. Yeah.
Mm.
and in the same way that I think there's the shift from leading ICs to leading leaders, where
Mhm.
you need to help people make decisions and have the
That's right.
frameworks and the values and how do you make decisions. And it's the exact same with AI. You have to teach AI how to think about decisions.
Yeah, we do that a lot. I mean, we have this process for our customers, and it's just called like developing a guide, right? So, the same I think is applicable to how we lead. Like, what's the guide? So, yeah, that's
Mm.
one of the things I'm
Yeah.
working on. I think eventually it will be a game changer that we can use. I mean, I think the other one too, I mentioned this earlier, but now that our teams have access to large language models to analyze our customer data, unearthing insights that are happening in their customer base based on conversations is something that we're doing with every strategic account now. We're working on how to further productize that. So, I mean, eventually it's a product that we can even sell to our customers, but right
Yeah.
now, our CSMs and AMs are using it to have more insightful conversations. I also want to apply that to how we look at churn prediction and revenue forecasting. So we're usage and consumption based. So we charge by conversation. So
Yeah.
any number of conversations that our customers are having with their customers is how we bill. And so there's trends that we can see in terms of which channels of conversation, the length of time. So want to start to apply some level of AI so that we're better predicting and forecasting based on historical. So that's something that's under works. But just being able to have, our CSMs going into a QBR, again, have more insightful conversations like what trends are we seeing? The thing I'm coaching the team on though is how do we even ask the right questions? So again, there's a ton of data and the data can tell you a lot, but do you know what to ask of it? And do you know what matters to your customer too to ask of it? So that's where we're spending a lot of time now. So we've got the tools, but you still need to know what you're looking for and know what's important to ask.
Yeah. That's a really good segue to talk about the skills that are needed. We're talking a little bit about what AI can do, what people can do. At the heart of it, there are still people skills that are needed, AI in general, to be
Yeah.
successful. And you wrote a book on this. You contributed to a book on this. What are you predicting we will be needing in terms of human skills going forward?
Yeah. I mean, just based on that last example, I think business acumen is still very relevant, now more than ever. I coach my team on the what, the so what, and the now what. Right. So, we usually stop, when I'm looking at it, reviewing a QBR, we usually stop at the what. It's like, here's how many widgets of units of, here's the, what happened. But like, so what? What's the context? Why should I care? What does this mean for my business? What does this mean for our customers? And then the now what? Okay, now that I have that context, what's your recommendation on what I should do about it? What's next, right? That to me is when you're really adding value to your customer conversation. So I think business acumen, the context, what's happening in the market, yes, AI can help you with a little bit of that, but I think that that's still going to be a critical skill going forward. And honestly, the people that are going to do it well are going to use AI to help them. So, and I think that that's one area. I think judgment and just decision making, going back to putting some of that down on paper, but you know, how good of a judge are you on kind of what's happening on this account? Yes, data can tell you a lot, but do you make good judgment, good decisions, right? Do you have the frameworks to help you make good decisions? I think that that's gonna still be critical. And I think the one we also get tapped with our customers to help them with is change leadership, right? Again, they come to us and they're like, oh, I just got a New York Times alert about this new model. Or what's happening? I have no idea. And then how do I get my teams to actually adopt this? How do I think about this as a leader? So helping people manage change and contextualize change and what's happening. We as go-to-market leaders increasingly have to do that for our customers, but also for our teams as well. So I think that that's a big one. I think maybe the last one is around storytelling and strategic communication. Have to be persuasive in everything that we do. So being able to help your teams, help your customers understand what's happening. But the way that we do that is through good communication and storytelling. AI doesn't really do a good job of that. It kind of sounds like AI. And I think that, the human ability to connect at an emotional level is still going to be really important. So how can you tell a good story? How can you be persuasive with data, with storytelling? I think is going to be a skill that continues to matter.
You have, I guess, the luck to work probably in one of the most competitive space in terms of AI challenger. Do you see a difference in how they operate and approach? I mean, obviously, I think the skills you described, they're true across the board. Probably you own them by performing and by learning and by making mistakes and all of these things. In your like in the competition you have with challenger coming from an AI bottom up, do you
Mhm.
see like a cultural difference or a different approach, or do you think about that, or you don't really care about it?
No, we do think about it. I'm glad that you brought up the space that we're in, highly competitive.
Yeah.
Our renewal conversations now and our expansion conversations now are almost like new business deals. We've never seen this type of pressure before.
Yeah.
And that is one of the ways that we are trying to differentiate. Look, some of our competitors are well-funded 28-year-olds, which is great. I love youth. Youth is great. But what youth doesn't bring necessarily in, my 20 years of working with executives and call centers around the world is that depth of appreciation of like how hard their job is, right? Is the context of, if you have an outsourced team globally, like what that means for cultural considerations and
Mm.
how you deploy AI to them. So I think it is important and it is helpful context to think about what different unique skills and a history of delivering this type of work means. So I do think things like your ability to tell a great story, your ability to connect, your business acumen, how have you led through other change? Those are things that we are bringing as part of like why you should work with Quiq. Yes, our
Mm.
software is great and can do all the things. I think the harsh reality with a lot of SaaS these days is that they all can do a lot of the same things. There's not a lot of product moat in certain industries and in certain products. And so
Yeah.
then what else is this customer buying? Like, they're buying the people, they're buying your expertise, they're buying your ability to work with them. So I think all of that still matters. And it's going to matter even more when you see the commodification of a lot of SaaS products. Yeah, we're in a very competitive space. We're still winning a lot of these deals. And I think that is a reason why.
Cool.
Yeah. I think it's always been true that people buy from people. There's that saying.
That's a
They
great
buy
way
the
to say it.
product, they buy the value. I had the same conversation with an executive at a Fortune 200 company 10 years ago who said, "Look, yeah, there's other companies that do what you do, but we know that you're going to be with us, whether it
That's
goes
right.
well or not, and stay with us till you make it right. And that's why we're talking to you instead of your
Yeah.
competitor." And I think that
Yeah.
that still matters. It's interesting as the differentiator.
Absolutely.
We This has been a fantastic conversation, and I'm very conscious of your time. I think we could talk for hours. But I'm curious, Jan, what are some of your key takeaways? Because I know I've learned a lot from this
Yeah, I
conversation.
think I think for me, this I really like this kind of war room culture across the
Mhm.
team. I think that's a super interesting approach to have this like weekly frequency, but that's
Yeah.
properly war room structure. Obviously, you're in an industry where it's usage based. Every week,
Mhm.
as it's like there is a lot of events that happen all the time, and so frequency matches. I think that was interesting to
Yeah.
see.
Yeah, for me, I'm seeing a lot of leaders who are doing everything from just mandate that everyone uses AI to create incentives for the teams to
Yeah.
come up with new ideas. And I think, yeah, maybe it is just having a role to focus on it. Um,
Yeah.
and also, I really love your framework, the what, so what, now what. That's something I talk a lot about with teams, but you always bring the clearest frameworks and snippets. I love that. Thank you so
Cool.
much, Ejieme, for your
Thank you.
time.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
For me and great conversation. I'm glad I got to share with you all today.
All right.